Hank Collier had finally found peace. After 3 decades with the fire department, he wasn't looking for much, just a patch of grass, some quiet evenings, and a home where he didn't have to explain why he grilled at sunrise. His new place sat on the edge of a neatly organized neighborhood just outside Mesa, Arizona. Wide driveways, trimmed shrubs, and signs posted at the entrance saying community first. But peace doesn't last when it's measured in inches. The first week went fine. Hank replaced the garage door, fixed up the porch, and then called in a contractor for what he thought would be a routine fence installation. He wanted privacy, not because he had something to hide, but because retirement didn't mean he wanted to wave at every dog-walking neighbor 6 times a day. The cedar panels were up by Friday, straight, strong, and within the surveyed boundary lines, or so Hank thought. Saturday morning brought something unexpected. She stood there in his yard like she'd always owned it. Beige blouse tucked too tightly, clipboard in hand, and a pair of sunglasses that didn't hide the disapproval on her face. Karen Delacourt, vice president of the Homeowners Association, and apparently self-declared sheriff of fence alignment. "You've built it too far," she said without looking up. 6 inches onto the common line. Hank squinted. "I went by the plot I got from the county. Had a guy survey it twice." Karen didn't blink. "Those maps are often wrong. I have the original HOA plat." She tapped the clipboard like it was gospel. Hank didn't move. "Neither did his fence." Karen sniffed. "You'll need to have it removed. We can fine you per day until you comply." He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just nodded once and said, "Send whatever you've got in writing." The next morning, the letter came. White envelope, HOA seal. Warning of escalating fines. The tone was sharp, polite, but sharp. The kind of sharp that didn't invite a conversation, it warned of one being taken from you. Hank leaned back in his lawn chair, stared at the fence, and then at the property stakes still sticking out of the dirt. They hadn't moved, but someone wanted them to. The following evening, something odd happened. A flicker outside. Hank glanced at the monitor connected to his outdoor cameras. At 11:42 p.m., someone stood near his fence with a flashlight and what looked like a measuring tape. She paced, she pointed. She stepped back and jotted something down. It wasn't a contractor, it was Karen. Just she was alone, in her socks, pacing out. 6 inches under the moonlight. By Monday, Hank had already started a file. He wasn't one to pick a fight, but he knew when one was coming. His daughter Gwen dropped by that afternoon, carrying a coffee and one eyebrow already raised. "She's measuring your fence at night now?" Gwen asked, flipping through the footage. "That's normal." Hank shrugged. "She says I'm over the line. I say I'm not." "You want to end this quick?" Gwen set her cup down. "Let me pull a new survey. I'll get one done by Thursday." And Gwen wasn't just any daughter, she was a civil engineer. One who didn't like bullies, especially the HOA kind. But Hank didn't sit idle either. He planted markers, triple-checked his own paperwork, and rewatched the footage. He started noticing other details. Karen's fence, for instance, it seemed off, angled oddly near the back. He walked the line one afternoon and stopped cold. Her fence wasn't perfect either. In fact, it might be worse than his. Thursday evening came fast. Gwen showed up with her laptop and a grin. "You're good," she said, spinning the screen toward him. "But here's the kicker. Her backyard fence. It's over your property line, by almost a foot." Hank looked up slow. "You sure?" Gwen nodded. "Positive. You've got the legal ground here. Not just 6 inches of it, Lev." Hank leaned back again, slower this time. A long breath escaped through his nose. He didn't want a war, but it seemed like one had already started. And now, he had a battle plan. For most of his life, Hank Collier fought fires. Real ones, with smoke and panic and split-second decisions. But this new fire burned differently. Quiet, petty, full of forms and whispers and rules with more asterisks than sense. By the time Gwen confirmed the property lines, Hank had made 3 decisions. 1, the fence was staying. 2, he'd be watching. And 3, if Karen wanted to play games, he'd play smart. The cameras stayed on 24 hours now. Not because Hank was afraid. He just didn't like surprises, especially the kind that walked around his yard with a flashlight and a notepad. It didn't take long for the footage to get strange again. 2 nights after Gwen's visit, Karen was back, this time with binoculars and a small folding chair. She sat across the street, sipping what looked like chamomile tea, just staring. She watched the fence like it was going to grow legs and sprint into her flower beds. Hank didn't react. He watched from his recliner, muting the TV every now and then to check the monitor. She'd sit for an hour, then shuffle back inside like she hadn't just staked out a neighbor's lawn like a sitcom detective. Next morning, Karen upped the ante. A bright yellow notice appeared on Hank's front door. Another fine. This one, citing improper tool storage behind the shed, and obstruction to neighborhood aesthetics. Then a second complaint, grass exceeding regulation height. Hank measured it himself. It was 2 inches below the limit. He didn't bother calling anyone. He just printed the city's landscaping code, laminated it, and pinned it right below the HOA notice. By noon, Karen had torn it down. The fence meanwhile stood still. Clean, legal, and according to Gwen's files, entirely compliant. Hank wasn't just on firm ground, he owned it, every inch of it. But Karen wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in winning. Later that week, Gwen returned with something better than coffee: county parcel maps, up-to-date surveys, and a grin that said she'd been doing homework. "She built her fence a foot onto your side," Gwen said, tapping the tablet screen. "It's old, but the boundary line's clear. If anyone's trespassing, it's her." Hank nodded. "Thought so. You want to do this quiet or loud?" He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Let's start with quiet. That way, when it gets loud, it's on her." They made copies. Not just one or two, but enough to show the entire HOA board if it came to that. And if Karen kept pushing, it would dot by Friday. Karen made her next move. An HOA bulletin went out to the entire neighborhood, a digital newsletter called Community Standards Monthly. In it, a suspiciously specific paragraph warned residents about newcomers who may not understand our commitment to shared space. Harmony. Hank read it twice, then laughed. Shared space, Harmony, that was rich. He printed a copy and stuck it in his file. This wasn't about a fence anymore. This was about control, appearances, and Karen wanted to keep hers spotless, even if that meant smearing someone else. That weekend, Hank held a garage sale not because he needed the money, but because it gave him a reason to be outside all day. Karen came by 3 times, never said a word, just circled, peering at tools, scribbling in her notebook. "You know she's going to file another complaint, right?" Gwen said, setting up a folding table with old fireman memorabilia. "Let her," Hank said. "We're not reacting. Not yet, because sometimes letting someone dig their own hole works better than grabbing a shovel." And Karen. She'd been digging since the first clipboard meeting. That night, Gwen brought over a surprise. It wasn't just survey maps this time. It was drone footage, crisp, clear, and time-stamped. A slow pan of both properties, showing exactly where the fences fell. "You want fireworks?" Gwen asked. "Not yet," Hank said. "But let's load the cannon." As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Karen's porch light blinked on again. She stood just inside the frame, curtain pulled to the side, eyes fixed on Hank's yard. He waved once. She didn't wave back. Instead, she turned off the light and disappeared into the dark. But Hank knew better. She hadn't vanished. She was just resetting the board, and Hank was ready for the next move. Tuesday nights in Rockridge Ridge were quiet except once a month. When the HOA board gathered in the community center, under flickering lights and folding chairs, Hank had never attended one. He figured they were for people who argued over mailbox colors and the number of flamingos allowed in the front yard. But this time, he made sure to sit in the front row. The meeting opened with the usual routine. Minutes read aloud, a treasurer mumbling about budgets. And then, just as Hank expected, Karen stood. She wore a gray skirt suit, stiff like it had never been sat in, and clutched her folder like it contained top-secret military intel. She cleared her throat and raised her voice with the confidence of someone who thought silence meant agreement. "There is a boundary violation on Lot 17, she announced, not even glancing toward Hank. "A fence installed without HOA alignment consultation. It exceeds the permitted line and point of order," someone muttered, but Karen pressed on. "And despite repeated notices, the resident has refused to comply. I request a board vote for daily fines until the structure is removed." Several heads turned toward Hank. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. One old man whispered to his wife, and she raised an eyebrow. Hank didn't rush. He stood slowly, tugged once at his collar, and unfolded a thick manila envelope. He laid its contents on the nearby table, one by one maps, time-stamped surveys, printed emails from city zoning, and finally, a short USB stick with the drone footage. Karen squinted. "This isn't the platform. I waited my turn." Hank said calm as ever. "Now I'd like to respond." The board president, Melvin Bragg, an aging man with a comb-over and a voice like sandpaper, adjusted his glasses. "Let's give Mr. Collier the floor." Hank stepped up, not to defend, but to demonstrate. He didn't raise his voice or wave his arms. He simply pointed. Survey data, certified measurements, drone imagery from Gwen, city-permitted build plans, all legal, all aligned. He even pulled out a binder with HOA bylaws highlighted sections. Karen had conveniently skipped dot. Then came the final piece. A screenshot from the county land registry. Karen's own backyard fence clearly encroaching onto Hank's land by over a foot. The room hushed. Karen's face twitched, barely holding its composure. "That's irrelevant. My fence was approved 20 years ago." "Then I guess you've been on my land for 20 years, Hank said. "I've got no issue with it." "Until now?" Melvin leaned back in his chair. "You're saying the complaint against you is invalid." "I'm saying it's not just invalid. It's a distraction." Another board member, quiet woman named Lindell, lifted the drone photo closer to the overhead light. "It's accurate," she said. "Karen, why wasn't this presented before the fine notice went out?" Karen bristled. "We don't need outside consultants for fences. Gwen's a civil engineer," Hank said. "Certified." Unlike a tape measure and an opinion, a low chuckle spread across the room. It wasn't laughter, not fully, but it was enough to break the silence. Melvin sighed. Let's table the fine pending full review of the documents. Karen nearly dropped her folder. Pending, she snapped. We're undermining HOA standards because someone knows how to print a chart. Melvin didn't respond, but the look said it all. Karen sat back down, hard, her jaw clenched. She looked around and noticed fewer eyes on her than she liked. The meeting moved on to new business. Mailbox upgrades, pool lighting. Hank stayed quiet, but just before the room emptied, he heard the words that changed everything. Karin, standing near the snack table, whispered just loud enough to the treasurer. He's dangerous, aggressive, shouldn't even be living here. Hank didn't respond, didn't turn. He just noted the tone. The game had shifted, from fences to reputations. And the next move wouldn't come with a clipboard, it would come with something else. The morning after the HOA meeting, Hank Collier opened his mailbox and found not one, but two new violations tucked between a pizza flyer and a utility bill. One said his lawn clippings had drifted visibly onto common property. The other claimed his tool shed was non-compliant due to an unapproved exterior color. It was beige, the exact same beige as Karen's. He read them both without a flinch, then folded them neatly and placed them beside his coffee mug, like old coupons. Karen had lost ground in the meeting, and now she was clawing for control anywhere she could. But Hank didn't complain. He didn't write emails or knock on doors. He just stepped outside, tugged on his work gloves, and spent the afternoon trimming hedges with the precision of a surgeon. He repainted the tool shed Evan, though he didn't need to this time, in glossy red, white, and blue stripes. Bold, clean, impossible to miss. The next day, he added a motion-activated sprinkler system, not for the plants, for something else. Because that evening, right on schedule, Karen walked by with her measuring tape again. As she leaned in to inspect a fence post, the sprinkler hissed to life. Catching her square across the knees, she let out a short shriek and scrambled backward into her own flower bed. Soaked and sputtering, Hank reviewed the footage from his camera, with a grin. Then quietly he uploaded the clip to a neighborhood forum. Just the footage, no caption, no commentary. The internet did the rest. By morning, the clip had circulated. Not viral to the world, but viral enough for Rock Ridge. Neighbors shared it with one man replied with a gif of a lawn gnome saluting. Karen said nothing, but her blinds stayed drawn the entire day. By Friday, Hank's front yard had become something of a passive protest. Gwen helped him paint the cedar fence with a mural, subtle enough not to trigger the bylaws. A mountain range, a waving flag, a fire engine rolling past a garden full of dogs. Nothing offensive, but unmistakably bold. Think she file a complaint? Gwen asked, packing up the paint cans. Of course, Hank said. That's the point. Sure enough, a letter came Monday morning, this one signed not by Karen, but by the HOA president himself. It was polite, professional. It asked if Hank might consider adjusting the mural to better reflect the uniform aesthetic goals of the neighborhood. Hank took a photo of the letter and sent it right back with a note of his own. I'll consider it when the HOA acknowledges property line errors on record. Silence followed. For once, Karen wasn't speaking, at least not directly, but Hank could feel her working behind the scenes. The whispers picked up again. During a walk, a neighbor named Jules hesitated before waving. Another resident paused before crossing paths with him at the mailbox. It was subtle, controlled, but the tone had shifted. Karen was turning the fence dispute into something personal. Not just about property, but about character. She started telling others that Hank had anger issues, that his military-style cameras were invasive, that he made her feel unsafe. The words weren't said to his face, but they spread like smoke. Hank didn't react, not outwardly, but Gwen saw it. The slow tightening of his jaw. The longer hours he spent on his porch, sipping coffee without a smile. This isn't just about her anymore, Gwen said. She's testing the waters, seeing if she can isolate you. She's trying to push me out, Hank said quietly. But Karen hadn't accounted for one thing. People talk, and not just to her. A neighbor Hank barely knew, a quiet man named Marcus who walked his schnauzer twice a day, stopped at the gate one morning. Hey, Marcus said, nodding toward the fence. Karen told me you were threatening the neighborhood. Hank didn't flinch. That's so. Yeah, but she also told Jules that Nancy's garden was a fire hazard. And last month she called code enforcement on that family down the road for hanging a pride flag. Hank raised an eyebrow. She's been doing this for years, Marcus said. You're just the first one who didn't back down. And that's when Hank knew he wasn't just fighting for 6 inches of land anymore. He was fighting for everyone who'd been steamrolled and silenced. And he had something Karen did, and single quotes T.proof. And an idea that might change everything. The invitation was simple. No flyers, no announcements. Just quiet conversations and a few casual mentions at mailboxes and dog walks. Hank called it a neighborhood barbecue. Not a protest, not a statement. Just burgers, hot dogs, lawn chairs, and cold drinks for anyone who was tired of walking on eggshells. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. By Saturday afternoon, more than 30 people were in his backyard. Gwen manned the grill like a general. Hank poured lemonade. Kids chased each other between garden beds, Retired couples sat under umbrellas and laughed like they hadn't in months. Karen watched it all unfold from behind her blinds, her face just barely visible through the curtains. She didn't step outside, but she didn't look away either. She didn't have to. The sound carried. For the first time, Hank saw who lived in the neighborhood, not just the backs of heads and name tags on mailboxes, but real people. One by one, stories trickled in. Jules, the woman with the blue hydrangeas, told him Karen once threatened her over a seasonal wreath that wasn't winter neutral. A man named Paul, who ran his business from his garage, said Karen called the county on him twice in 1 month, claiming unauthorized commerce. She tries to bury people in paperwork until they quit, he said. You're the first person I've seen push back. Later that evening, Hank brought out a cooler full of ice cream bars. Kids cheered. Gwen plugged in a speaker and played some blues. It wasn't loud enough to bother anyone unless they were already bothered by the fact that joy still existed next door. Karen's blinds snapped shut by sundown, but the next morning, Hank found a new letter on his porch. No envelope, just a single sheet of printer paper folded once. Taped to his fence. You are in direct violation of the HOA's guidelines for gatherings. No prior approval was submitted. Future violations will result in fines. No name signed. But he didn't. Need one. Karen was slipping. The official channels weren't working. Now she was trying scare tactics with printer ink. Hank didn't respond. He just added it to his growing file, which now sat 2 inches thick in a drawer labeled Fence Foolishness. That same week, Gwen had been digging through digital archives, HOA filings, old survey maps, anything she could find. And what she discovered made Hank sit up straight. The original lot diagrams. She said, flipping her laptop around. Karen submitted scanned versions of these years ago, but they don't match the county's certified records. You're saying she doctored them? Not necessarily, but they've been altered. Labels removed, borders adjusted. Enough to sway someone who doesn't know what they're looking at, like a new homeowner. Gwen nodded. Like you, it wasn't just pettiness anymore. It was manipulation. If Karen had modified HOA documents to support her side of the fence dispute, she might have done it to others too. Hank had a feeling he wasn't her first target, just her loudest. He made an appointment with Melvin, the HOA president. That Thursday afternoon, Melvin looked tired. His office was cluttered with binders, sticky notes, and a dusty jar of hard candies no one ever ate. Hank laid the evidence on his desk. The forged diagrams, the survey photos, the overlapping property lines, the escalating fines that contradicted community rules. Melvin sighed. You know, she's been on this board longer than I've lived in the neighborhood. That's not the question, Hank said. The question is whether the board wants to protect its reputation or go down with hers. Melvin didn't answer right away, but he didn't throw the papers away either. By the time Hank left, the air had changed, not just around the HOA office, but around the whole block. That weekend, Marcus the dog walker with a schnauzer brought over a homemade pie. Small thank you, he said. Most of us just got notices about lawn decorations. Again, what kind of decorations? Hank asked. Wreaths, flags, a pair of bunny statues. Sounds like a crime spree, Hank muttered. Marcus chuckled, but his eyes were serious. You might not know it, he said, but you've already started something. People are watching, waiting. You're not just standing your ground anymore. You're showing the rest of us we can too. Hank nodded. Because this was no longer about a fence. It was about how many quiet voices were done staying quiet, and how 1 inch of land had turned into a battlefield no one saw coming. The county truck pulled up just after noon. No sirens, no fanfare, just a quiet gray vehicle with a county seal on the door, and a man named Alonzo Ramirez stepping out with a GPS pole and a calm nod. Hank met him at the gate. File folder in one hand, coffee in the other. Alonzo didn't waste time. We'll resurvey it to the inch. We'll get an official packet in 3 days. I'll send the results directly to the HOA, too. Hank nodded. Just give me the truth. By now, half the neighborhood knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Karen, however, seemed to sense it. She didn't step outside once during the entire survey, but her curtains twitched every few minutes like someone pacing behind them. Alonzo worked quietly, placing markers with orange flags, double-checking boundaries, referencing legal plat maps and state files. Every time he placed another stake, Hank felt something shift, not just in the soil, but in the story Karen had worked so hard to tell. 2 hours later, it was done. Gave him a small nod and said, "You were right all along." That evening, Hank sat on the porch with Gwen and watched the sun drop behind the houses. A soft breeze tugged at the mural on the fence. The mountain peaks Gwen had painted caught the light just right, like the calm before a storm breaks. For good 3 days passed. Then came the envelope, stamped, sealed, and certified from the county office. Inside was the full survey, stamped in blue ink. Legal description, lot numbers, boundary markers all lined up exactly where Hank said they would be. But more than that, Karen's fence was confirmed to be over the line by exactly 14 inches. The next HOA meeting was already on the calendar. Hank didn't need to rally anyone. He just walked in with a single copy of the survey tucked under his arm and a flash drive in his pocket. Gwen came along, carrying the rest of the documentation. In a plain manila folder, the room was full. Neighbors lined the walls. Even people who'd never shown up before were now sitting up front. Curious, waiting. Karen sat stiffly near the front table, arms crossed, mouth tight. Melvin cleared his throat. Before we begin standard business, Mr. Collier has requested to present a follow-up. Hank stood slowly and faced the board. I've said from the start that my fence was legal, he began. But sometimes, saying it doesn't matter, you need to show it. He passed out printed copies to each board member, then plugged in the flash drive. The projector flickered to life, displaying clear drone footage, updated boundary overlays, and Alonzo Ramirez's signed report. Gwen spoke next. These diagrams, she said, holding up the original HOA documents Karen had provided months ago, were digitally altered, not by the county, not by the city. These were redrawn and submitted as official to the HOA by a board member, one with a personal interest in having them accepted. She didn't say the name. She didn't have to. Karen stood abruptly. This is character assassination. No one's mentioned your name, Melvin said quietly. Karen's voice sharpened. This man has harassed me. He's manipulated this board, poisoned this community. Paul, from the garage business, spoke from the back. You called zoning on me twice for delivering boxers. I hadn't even unpacked yet. Jules added. You told me I could lose voting rights if I didn't remove my holiday decor. Another neighbor, a soft-spoken woman named Tina, lifted her hand. You said my lavender bushes were threatening pollinators and demanded I pull them up. The room fell silent. Karen looked around, but this time, no one met her eyes. Melvin cleared his throat. Ms. Delacourt, the board will be reviewing these documents independently. If we find evidence of falsified filings, a formal vote on your position will be scheduled. Karen sat back down, face pale, but the damage wasn't over. Hank stepped forward once more, quiet but firm. I didn't come here to make enemies. I just wanted to build a fence. Everything else came later. He turned to face the room, not just the board, but the neighbors, the one silent crowd, now watching without fear. If this is what we let happen when someone tries to follow the rules, imagine what happens to the ones who don't know them. And, with that, he sat back down. Karen didn't speak again for the rest of the meeting, but she didn't have to. Everyone had already heard enough. Karen Delacourt's porch lights stayed off for days. She didn't walk her dog, didn't trim her hedges, didn't circle anyone's fence with a clipboard. For the first time since Hank Collier moved in, the street felt still, but stillness wasn't peace. It was the silence before the next move, and it came quietly, buried inside an agenda email from the HOA board. Special session, board review and conduct. Vote. The meeting was scheduled for Friday. No public comments, no social hour, just a line item with a name and a decision. Whether Karen would be formally removed from the board. Gwen read it out loud at the kitchen table, then looked up at Hank. She's not going down easy. I don't expect her to, Hank replied. All week, whispers circled like birds before a storm. Karen wasn't seen, but her voice still echoed through neighbors she had leaned on. Favors she'd granted, warnings she'd whispered. Some were nervous, some didn't know where they stood. Others wanted to back the winning side but weren't sure who it was anymore. Then, on Wednesday, just 2 days before the vote, it happened. A black SUV pulled up to Hank's curb. A man in a blazer stepped out, briefcase in hand. He introduced himself with a business card and a tight smile. Karen Delacourt has filed a personal grievance, he said, alleging harassment, emotional distress, and intentional defamation. Hank didn't blink, so she's suing me. She's filed a claim, not a full suit yet. The man handed over the papers, nodded, and left. Hank stood at the curb, staring at the envelope. She's playing the victim card, Gwen muttered, flipping through the documents. Trying to derail the vote. Maybe, Hank said, scanning the pages, or maybe she just wants to scare me quiet. But fear had a short leash with Hank, especially after a lifetime of facing worse than paperwork. He didn't go door to door or beg for sympathy. Instead, he sent a single email to the board, with the subject line, "For the record." Attached were Karen's original property complaints, the altered maps, the certified county survey, and, finally, the footage of her soaking herself in his sprinkler at midnight. The tone was measured. No accusations, just facts. It ended with a simple sentence. If this is what qualifies as harassment, then truth must be dangerous. Friday came. The meeting room was full, but quieter than usual. There were no cupcakes, no side chatter, just folded chairs, stiff backs, and a long rectangular table where the board sat with tired eyes. Karen wore the same gray suit from the first meeting, though it looked tighter now, wrinkled. She clutched a stack of printed notes, and didn't make eye contact with anyone. Melvin opened the session. We're here to vote on the continued placement of board member Karen Delacourt, following recent concerns regarding boundary disputes, procedural filings, and alleged document inconsistencies. Karen stood quickly, but Melvin raised his hand. No need to speak tonight, he said gently. We've reviewed all submissions. We're proceeding to a vote. One by one, hands went up. Some fast, some hesitant. But they went up. 4-1. Karen remained seated, her knuckles white around her folder. Melvin cleared his throat. Effective immediately, Karen Delacourt is removed from her duties as HOA vice president. Karen stood, slowly, like someone stepping off a ledge. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, just as Melvin began to rise, she spoke. "This neighborhood will fall apart without me," she said, voice trembling. "You think you've won because you embarrassed me. But this place only worked because I kept it clean, kept it orderly." No one replied. "I've kept this place safe from people like him." Still, no one answered. Then, in the quietest voice, from the back of the room, came a reply. "You mean people who follow the rules?" Karen turned out. It was Marcus, the man with the schnauzer. Karen opened her mouth again, but couldn't seem to find the words. Her folder slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft slap. She stepped over it and walked out the door. She never looked back. The room stayed still for a moment longer. Then Melvin spoke again. Meeting adjourned. People lingered. Afterward, some shook Hank's hand. Others just nodded, relief finally settling in. Gwen stood beside him, arms folded. "She's gone," she said. "Not quite," Hank replied. Gwen looked at him. "She filed that claim," he said quietly, "and she's not the type to walk away empty-handed." He looked out the window, past the parking lot, toward the street, where Karen's porch light still burned. "She's not finished yet." The week after the vote, the neighborhood shifted. Lawns still got mowed. Kids still rode scooters. But there was something else now, something quiet, like the air after a thunderstorm. No more surprise citations. No one prowling the streets with a clipboard. Karen's porch light went dark by Tuesday, and her curtains never twitched again. But Hank hadn't forgotten the envelope. The grievance she filed was still alive technically. The paperwork claimed emotional distress, defamation, and reputational sabotage, all filed under his name. And even if it was thin, it still hung there like a shadow. Hank met with a lawyer. He wasn't worried, just cautious. Gwen went with him. She'd already gathered every survey, every photo, every email. They filed a response within the week. By Thursday, the claim was dismissed. There was no evidence, no damages, no case. The court didn't even ask for a hearing. Karen never responded, never appealed. Her silence said more than her words ever did. But something else happened that day, something no one expected. Karen's house went up for sale. No for sale sign. No open house. Just a quiet listing through a private broker. Whispers moved fast though, first through the HOA board, then through inboxes and side conversations. "She's leaving," Jules said during a neighborhood walk. "Can't believe it. She's not the type to stay where she's lost control," Hank replied. 2 weeks later, a moving truck arrived. Karen wasn't outside. She hired a service. Boxers moved in silence. Her car parked in the garage the entire time. By dusk, the house was empty, but the damage she left behind lingered. At the next HOA meeting, Melvin passed around a motion to audit the board's archived decisions, every fine, every denial, every fence complaint filed over the last 5 years. No one opposed it. And then, quietly, Melvin turned to Hank. "There's an open board seat," he said. "We'd like you to consider filling it." Hank raised an eyebrow. "Me? You don't play games," Melvin said. "And we've had enough of those." Hank didn't answer that night. He just nodded once and said he'd think about it. The next morning, Hank walked the edge of his property line, measuring tape in one hand, Gwen by his side. They walked a full boundary, where the infamous fence still stood, clean and perfect. A few neighbors watched from their porches. "What are you thinking?" Gwen asked. He didn't answer. Not right away, but that weekend a landscaping crew showed up. They didn't tear the fence down. They moved it exactly 14 inches inward. 14 inches that legally belonged to him, but had been under Karen's fence for 20 years. By Sunday night, the fence stood in its new place. And in that reclaimed space, Hank planted something smaller, simple dogwood tree. It was young, just a sapling. But it would grow. And in front of it, a small engraved sign on a wooden stake. Private property confirmed by the truth. He didn't call attention to it. He didn't post it online. But people came by anyway, quietly, respectfully. Even those who never took sides before. They walked past the tree, nodded, and moved on. A week later, the new neighbor moved into Karen's old house. A young couple with a baby and a labradoodle. Friendly, smiling. They waved from the porch and asked Hank what kind of grass seed he used. Normal, peaceful, exactly what he'd been looking for when he moved here in the first place. Later that evening, Gwen leaned on the porch rail and sipped her drink. "You going to join the board?" she asked. "I might," Hank said, "but only if they stop printing the minutes in Comic Sans." Gwen laughed. "That's your red line?" "No," he said, smiling. "That was 14 inches ago." The sun dipped behind the rooftops. The mural on the fence caught the Light Mountains flags. A dog running beneath a fire truck, and just beyond it, a young tree stood alone. Quiet and strong. No more drama. No more tape measures in the dark. Just the soft sound of the wind moving through leaves that finally had space to grow.